Hi everyone, this is Matt. So we're continuing expanding on the first sandbox, the ASA 2.0. And although the ASDM is not necessarily a requirement to get this sandbox working, it's one of those tools that is pretty invaluable if you're going to be using the ASA, because the ASDM really organizes graphically some key components, makes it a little bit easier to configure the ASA with. And it took a while for me to kind of wrap my head around the ASDM, but really there's a whole series that should be treated just for the ASDM. So for those of you who don't know, when you have an ASA, Microsoft has this graphical tool called the ASDM, and simply put, it allows you to do some configuring, visually look at firewall rules, do a lot of configuring, monitoring. You can set up DHCP services. It's just a very big tool to manage security in general with the ASA. So it deserves some attention with the sandbox. I mean, I would be remiss if I go through this whole entire channel and I don't talk about the ASDM. So what I would suggest doing is let's take a look at in a diagram. Again, I don't get paid for lucid charts. I just like to mock up the logical flow of things. And this is what we're going to be talking about specifically for the ASDM as it relates to our sandbox. The first phase is just getting the file. And there's a lot of steps here. So first of all, you have to get the ASDM. And that falls back to an original conversation in the original sandbox about how to get Cisco images. It's the same thing. You're going to just have to work through your channels to get it. And if you need more information, go watch that other series about the original ASA sandbox. We are going to install a Tftp server. So those of you who are not really adept at Linux, it's going to take some work here because you're going to be running a GNS3 VM, which is Linux based. And, you know, there's some great stuff online, some Googling, but some documentation is better than others. So I'm just going to have you cut through all that, you know, save yourself some time. I'll point to the better documentation to set up your TFTP server. The next one is configuring it, because everything in Linux is a file. So you're going to have to put in the right variables, the right things for your environment. We'll use, of course, the sandbox as an example, but you're going to have to go into files with a text editor. It's a typical Linux thing. That's a daily thing you do. And then we're going to achieve downloading a copy of this ASA, right? This bin file. We're going to have to find a way to get it into the ASA. So the way I do it, that's a little bit better, is I've tried SCP as far as file transfer, but I found it was a little more intuitive and easier if you were just in the ASA, connecting back to the GNS3 VM and then pulling the file from that TFTP server. So that's what this first phase is just getting the bin file into the ASA. We're talking about the ASDM. Okay, phase 2 is connecting from the GNS3 VM to the ASA, but first you're going to need to add some packages. The big one is Java. So you need the JRE runtime, and I think I'm using an 8. I think I'm using an older version. Just whatever is in the repositories for, you know, apt. The next thing is we're going to have to set the environment variables. We're literally going to have to tell the system where to find this Java environment so that when you launch a program, you're going to launch the ASA. So we're talking about phase 2. You know, this JRE environment, we have to set the environment in your GNS3 VM. And then there's an interesting little thing that I found really worked. I loved it. It kind of taught me something about, you know, how to hack actual pages, web pages. Essentially, what's going on with this is that modern browsers kind of block Java stuff. So you literally have to go into the page in the editor and search for the control and that button and make it visible. It's very convoluted. There's a whole video just on this one part. And then finally, if everything goes well, you're going to launch the ASDM program and be able to log in to the ASA. So let's just finish this video with just what we're supposed to expect when we're done with this series for the ASDM. So I'm going to pause the video, and then I'm going to launch the GNS3 VM, and I'm going to launch GNS3, and I'll get right back to you. Okay, we're back. So right now we have our Sandbox lit up. We have our GNS3 VM running, which is housing our Sandbox, and I've got the ASA console running. So what you're going to end up doing is what you should be able to do is go into your GNS3 Sandbox, the GNS3 VM. You'll go into the terminal, check your directory. I think I have it just in the downloads folder. But what you want is this ASDM JNLP. Well, you can't get that file unless you're hitting the ASA, because that's actually what the web service is when you enable it on the ASA. That it's got this JNLP file you need. You won't be able to access ASA without it. But then, to complicate things, you're going to have your Java runtime environment be working pretty clean, because you're going to need to run a, I think it's a Java web start app, and then you're going to do something like that. So now it's using the Java in your environment, in your Linux environment, the GNS3 VM, and now it's hitting our ASA, which is this address, and it's going to present this really pretty application. We're going to run it, and because this is a Sandbox, I have my own account. Oops. Okay. So once we get in, it's a fully functioning ASDM program that's looking at the ASA security appliance. And also, just as a little confession here, as you've been noticing in my channel, I don't do a lot of editing. I kind of fumble and mess up in some places. And one of the big goofs that I caught was I was saying in the last video that you shouldn't be able to ping to something. Well, I forgot that because it's stored in the GNS3 VM, GNS3 VM pulled the file that I already had the firewall rule in allowing ICMP traffic. So let me just show that to you. So this is a fully functioning ASDM. For those of you who want to get into learning about Cisco ASA, I definitely recommend going through this series just to learn how to get this started, because when you get into the firewall rules, I'm not sure if I could close this. I can adjust this. Yikes, I'm fighting with this stupid thing. I wish there was a cleaner way to do it. Let me just go full screen on here. Yikes. No, let's close this one then. Let's close this one too. Okay, so I actually have only a few rules in here, but you see where it says ICMP allow? One of the first things I configured via the command line was to allow pinging from my outside interface, and normally that's crazy. Like you don't want to do that, but in this case, because I'm in my Sandbox, if you look at the diagram now, let's just get out of this. If you look at this diagram here, my GNS3, this GNS3 is sitting on the outside of this cloud interface. Okay, it's sitting outside. So then naturally I would have to set a rule up to allow pinging on this interface if I named this one as the outside interface. So this is the way it's set up. The ASA's outside interface is this link, and my GNS3 is sitting outside of it. So naturally, you're going to have a rule put in to allow you to ping on that outside interface. And so what was great about this is before I even thought about doing this whole series, that was kind of the stuff I was fumbling through with the ASA and forgot that was in the configs. So then when I was doing the video yesterday and I was saying, yeah, it should blow up on you. Well, by default, it will because you don't have a rule defined. But as you can clearly see, ASDM is pretty useful, isn't it? Because it graphically shows you your firewall rules. So just to reiterate, excuse me, we see that this rule right here, the ICMP allowing, I had to do that in this for this sandbox. And that's just how it is because you have the GNS3 outside of the topology. So the GNS3 VM is outside of this topology. And so for me to be able to interact with the ASA, I would have to define this as the outside interface right here. And I would have to define this as the inside interface of the ASA. And that's a whole other series. But for right now, this is just the ASDM getting it to work, getting it to look beautiful for this next series. But this is what, if you go through the next series of vlogs, whatever you want to call this, you should be able to get to this. And now the sandbox really opens up because now you can just crack open a Cisco book and start, honing in on your security skills with the ASA. So I hope you enjoyed this quick video, and I thank you for watching.